I never thought moving into a new house would turn into such a nightmare. My family found it at a low price, and honestly, I was more excited about finally having our own place than I was concerned about how old and worn it looked. From day one, something felt off in the house. It was dark and quiet, even when I turned on all the lights. The walls creaked, and sometimes it seemed like someone was whispering in the corners. I tried to ignore it, but soon it became clear that something was wrong. One night, while everyone was asleep, I heard sounds coming from the basement. At first it was quiet footsteps, then muffled voices. I knew I shouldn't go down there, but curiosity got the better of me. I quietly approached the basement door and cracked it open. The stairs led down into darkness, and I felt like someone was waiting for me down there. I grabbed a flashlight and, taking a deep breath, began to descend. Each step echoed ominously. At the bottom stood an old wooden door slightly ajar. My heart raced so loudly that I thought it might be heard outside the basement. I pushed the door open. Inside was cold and dark. Old photographs of people with vacant expressions hung on the walls. In one picture, I saw myself, though I had never taken it. With horror, I stepped back. Someone was watching me. I turned to run, but at that moment, I heard someone whispering my name. It was a soft but persistent voice, and it sounded so close. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. At home, I clutched my pillow, unable to sleep. The next day, I told my parents, but they just laughed it off, saying I watched too many horror movies. I decided I needed to figure this out myself. I researched the house's history and discovered that a family had lived there before, disappearing under mysterious circumstances. No one had ever found them. With each passing day, things in the house got worse. I heard footsteps behind me when no one was around and felt like someone was always watching. One night, I ventured down to the basement again, but this time I was prepared. I took a camera with me, hoping to capture something. As I entered, I noticed another photograph lying on an old table. It showed the same family, but this time they were smiling. On the back was the inscription, "We never leave." At that moment, panic seized me. I hastily took a few pictures and burst out of the basement, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I reviewed my photos. But in them, it wasn't just me and the family, there were also silhouettes of people standing behind me. I could no longer stay in that house. I told my parents we needed to leave. They finally saw that something was seriously wrong with me and agreed. We moved out the next day. Now I know that sometimes cheap houses aren't just a good deal, they can be traps, and perhaps those who have left this world never really leave at all. Story 2. The Johnson family decided to start a new life in a small town by buying an old house full of character. From the outside, it looked charming, intricately carved balconies, green shutters, and a cozy garden. However, inside there was an eerie silence, broken only by the creaking of floorboards. On the very first evening, while unpacking boxes, they began to hear strange whispers coming from the walls. At first it seemed natural. The house was old. Perhaps it was just the pipes or the wind. But as the days went by, the whispers grew clearer and louder. Little Emily, the Johnsons' daughter, once said she felt like someone was calling her name. Her mother, Lisa, tried not to think too much of it, but deep down she was troubled. One night, when everyone was asleep, the whispers became particularly insistent. Unable to resist her curiosity, Lisa got up and moved toward the wall from which the sounds were emanating. Pressing her ear against it, she caught some words: help, hidden search. This made her shiver in fear. She decided to tell her husband, Daniel, but he brushed it off, thinking it was just the result of exhaustion. The next day, Lisa set out to explore the house. She noticed a small crack in the wall in one corner where the whispers were the loudest. As she pried away some boards, she discovered a hidden corridor that led to an old, abandoned room. The room was filled with dust and cobwebs. Old photographs of the family who once lived there hung on the walls. Lisa felt a cold breeze, as if someone had just passed by. In the center of the room stood an old trunk that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Gathering her courage, she lifted the lid and saw that it contained old letters and a diary. As she read through the entries, she learned that the house once belonged to a family who had experienced a tragedy. Their daughter had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and since then, her spirit had lingered in the house, trying to find peace. Lisa realized that the whispers were a call from this troubled spirit, trying to convey its story. She gathered her family and shared her findings. Together, they decided to hold a ritual to help the spirit find peace. That night, as they spoke words of forgiveness and light, the whispers began to fade. The room, once filled with darkness, was suddenly enveloped in a gentle glow. The sensation of presence became less heavy, and silence reigned in the house. By morning, the whispers had ceased. The Johnsons felt that their new home no longer held any troubling memories. The house had truly become a home, a place where they could begin anew, knowing there was no more fear, only the memory of someone who had once sought help. And although the whispers had quieted, they remained in their hearts, a reminder of how important it is to listen to and understand not only each other but also those who may be invisible yet still in need of support. Story number 3. On that chilly autumn evening, as the wind whispered through the trees, 4 friends, Jake, Amy, Sam, and Liz, decided they needed a night out. Their small town felt dull and lifeless, and they craved adventure. The night was clear, and the moon shone so brightly that even the empty streets looked mysterious. "Let's go to the old house on the outskirts," suggested Sam with a smirk. They said it had been abandoned for years and was haunted. Everyone agreed, and Jake, who was driving, steered the car toward their destination. The road became narrower and tall trees lined the path with branches resembling twisted fingers. Finally, the old house loomed before them, looking ominous with its broken windows and sagging roof. Parking the car at a distance, the friends stepped out and slowly approached the house, feeling the cold wind cutting through their clothes. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel underfoot and the soft whispers of the night. "Remember, it's just a house," Liz tried to reassure everyone, though her voice trembled with unease. As they entered, the old floorboards creaked beneath them. The air was thick with the smell of dust and mildew. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting strange shadows. They split up. Amy and Liz went upstairs, while Jake and Sam remained on the ground floor. Amy stumbled upon an old dresser covered in dust and started to open it. Inside, she found yellowed letters and old photographs. Meanwhile, Sam was exploring the hallway when he suddenly heard something crash below. "Jake? Liz?" he called out, but there was only silence in response. Feeling anxious, he hurried upstairs to join the girls. They exchanged worried glances. "Let's check what happened," Amy suggested. As they descended to the first floor, they noticed the door leading to the basement was slightly ajar. Fear washed over them, but curiosity pushed them forward. Jake took a flashlight and stepped onto the creaking stairs first, followed by the others. In the basement, a musty smell filled the air. In the corner, they spotted an old, dusty lantern that suddenly flickered to life. As Jake approached it, they heard strange sounds like whispers. They froze, straining to listen. "It's just the wind," Liz tried to calm them, though her voice quivered with fear. Suddenly, the lantern went out, plunging them into pitch darkness. Footsteps echoed closer. The friends stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "We need to get out of here," Sam whispered, and they began to move toward the stairs. But just then the basement lit up again. A figure stood at the top of the stairs. He was tall, with wild hair and a strange, almost feral gaze. The friends trembled, unable to move. The man slowly descended, muttering something unintelligible. "He's going to see us," Amy hissed, and in that moment they turned and started to run. Jake bolted toward the exit, with the others following closely behind. As they raced through the house, it seemed to close in on them again. They stumbled into an old kitchen and spotted a window. Trying to open it, they could hear the footsteps getting closer. "Hurry," Liz yelled, and finally the window gave way. They climbed out into the cold night air, not looking back, and dashed toward the car. Once inside, Jake started the engine, and as they sped away, leaving the house behind, adrenaline surged through them. They exchanged wide-eyed glances, a mix of disbelief and fear. "Did you see that?" Sam exclaimed as they reached safety. "We are never going back there," Liz declared firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. That night, they truly understood that some adventures are better left unexplored. The night was filled with mystery and terror, but they knew one thing: friendship and support are more important than any abandoned house. From that day on, every time they passed by that spot, a sense of unease washed over them. But along with it came the realization that true adventures are not just about fear, but also about the shared memories that would remain in their hearts forever. Story number 4. In a small village where houses stood so close they seemed like old friends, the Smith family decided to move into an abandoned house on the edge of the forest. Rumors that no one had lived in this house for a long time were unsettling, but the desire to start a new life outweighed their fears. When they first entered the house, the air was thick with dust and silence, as if time had stopped here. Every step on the creaky floors echoed in the empty rooms. The mother, Laura, tried to convince her children that this place was filled with possibilities, but her voice sounded uncertain. On the very first night, when the family held a small celebration for their move, the children, Dan and Amy, noticed a door to the attic that they hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, and a cold breeze wafted through the crack, as if the attic was calling to them. Their curiosity overcame their fear, and they decided to go up. The attic was dark and dusty. Beams of light broke through the cobwebs, and in that light, they saw old things, worn-out toys, rusty tools, and most intriguingly, a large doll in a dirty dress with a cracked face. Its strange, empty eyes seemed to watch them. "Dan, I'm scared," Amy whispered, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Let's just take the doll. Maybe someone will want it back," suggested her brother, even though he felt that something was off. When they returned downstairs, the doll stayed with them. That night, as the children slept, quiet rustling sounds filled the house. Laura, waking from the noise, got to her feet. Silence enveloped the house once more, but a sense of unease grew in her heart. The next day, Dan noticed that the doll had changed its position. Now, it was sitting on the edge of the bed, its eyes glowing with something resembling joy. The children quickly realized that strange things were happening with the doll. It appeared in unexpected places, and at night they could hear its soft whispers. Laura decided it was time to clear out the attic and get rid of the old things. When she returned to the attic, she discovered that the doll was gone. Instead, she found an old diary lying on the floor with entries from the house's previous owners. Laura began to read and understood that the doll had belonged to a girl named Sarah who had lived in this house many years ago. She had vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving her parents heartbroken. The more Laura read, the more she felt that the doll was not just a toy, it was a vessel holding sorrow and fear. She decided the doll needed to be returned to the attic and sealed away. The night when Laura attempted to do so, she heard a familiar whisper. The words were unclear, but they carried a plea: "Don't leave me alone." Gathering her courage, she returned the doll to the attic and locked the door behind her. But the next morning, when the family gathered for breakfast, they noticed the doll sitting on the kitchen table, its eyes filled with tears. From that moment, strange occurrences began in the house. Objects moved on their own, and soft footsteps echoed at night. The children grew fearful of coming home. Laura realized that retreating was no longer an option. They had to unravel this mystery. That evening, she ascended to the attic, holding the diary in her hands, and spoke aloud. "Sarah, we're here, we can hear you." In response, a quiet laugh echoed, but it sounded nothing like a child's. It was a laugh filled with sorrow and longing. The house fell silent that night, but Laura couldn't sleep. She knew they had to find a way to help Sarah's spirit find peace before the house consumed them. The doll vanished again, and with its disappearance, so did the rustling sounds. Despite her fear, Laura decided to perform a ritual to help free the girl's spirit. All evening she read aloud, and finally the doll appeared. As if in response to her words, the doll began to move slowly and then vanished, leaving behind only a soft thank you. In the morning, the family awoke in a quiet house. There were no more rustles or strange happenings. A feeling of lightness enveloped them, and they realized that perhaps Sarah had finally found peace. Now this house could become a true home for them, filled with light and warmth. Story number 5. In 2016, in a quiet town, there lived a young man named Alex. He worked in an office and often felt exhausted after long weeks. One Saturday, tired after a stressful week, Alex decided to go to bed early. He settled into his small one-bedroom apartment, covered himself with a blanket, and soon fell into a deep sleep. His dreams were strange and unsettling. They were filled with blurred faces in familiar places, but with a sinister twist. Alex tried to wake up, but he couldn't. He felt as if his body had become heavy and immobile, trapped within his own mind. Finally, he woke up. The room was dark, and he reached for his phone to check the time. The screen read 3:33. Suddenly, something strange caught his eye. Next to his bed was another bed. Alex knew it hadn't been there when he fell asleep. His heart raced, and a chill ran down his spine. On the second bed lay a figure, wrapped in a white sheet. Alex stared at this strange sight, trying to comprehend what was happening. No one had keys to his apartment, and he wasn't expecting anyone. Fear paralyzed him. He got out of bed and attempted to approach the door as quietly as possible. His hands shook, and he fumbled, missing the light switch. When he finally turned on the light, the figure remained motionless. The sheet looked worn and stained. Alex took a step closer, his heart pounding as if it wanted to leap out of his chest. He reached out to touch the sheet, and at that moment the figure stirred. Alex jumped back, his breath catching in his throat. The figure slowly sat up, the sheet still covering its face. Alex felt a cold shiver run through him. "Who are you?" He barely managed to whisper. There was no response. The figure stood up, still wrapped in the sheet, and took a step toward him. Panic gripped Alex. He turned and ran for the door, his hands fumbling with the lock. He could hear the figure's footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. When he finally burst into the hallway, he slammed the door behind him, barely avoiding injury to his fingers. He ran down the stairs, feeling like he was escaping something relentless. At last, he found himself outside, the cool night air hitting his face. Alex wandered the streets, unsure of what to do. The night grew darker, and his thoughts were filled with anxiety. He decided to stop at a 24-hour diner to gather himself. As he sat at a booth, he couldn't help but keep glancing at the entrance. Each time someone walked in, he flinched. He ordered coffee, but his thoughts were tumultuous. The figure from his apartment haunted him. Soon he made a decision: he needed to return and figure out what had happened. As the first light of dawn began to break, Alex made his way back to his apartment. The door was still closed, but he felt he had to go in. He opened the door and, holding his breath, stepped inside. The room was quiet again, and the figure was gone. Alex felt a slight relief, but anxiety still lingered. He began searching the apartment, and when he reached the bedroom, his heart sank again. On the floor, he spotted an old photograph he had never seen before. It depicted his apartment, but in it stood the same figure, now with its face revealed. Alex didn't know what to think. He started looking for information about the previous tenants of his apartment and discovered that many years ago, a tragedy had occurred here. A girl had gone missing. The realization washed over him. The figure was a spirit, trapped in this world due to unfinished business. Now Alex knew what he had to do. He sought ways to help the soul move on. It was not an easy path, but he was determined. Gradually, he felt the atmosphere in the apartment change. It became lighter and more peaceful. Weeks later, Alex sensed that everything had quieted down. One evening, he lay down to sleep again, and after all the turmoil, he fell into a deep slumber. This time, his dreams were serene. Deep down, he knew he had finally freed the one who needed help and could now live in peace. Story number 6. I never thought much about old houses until we moved into one. It had been in my family for generations, a sprawling Victorian with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper. My parents were excited, but I felt a chill every time I stepped inside. One rainy afternoon, I decided to explore the attic. My parents were busy unpacking, so I had the place to myself. Climbing the narrow stairs, I pushed open the heavy door. Dust motes danced in the air, and the faint smell of mildew filled my nose. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, filled with forgotten trinkets and yellowed newspapers. As I sifted through the boxes, I noticed a small door at the far end of the attic that I'd never seen before. It was barely the size of a closet door, hidden behind some old furniture. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept over to it. The door was locked, but I could see a faint light shining through the cracks around the edges. I felt a strange pull to it. I found a rusty old key on the floor nearby, half buried in the dust. It looked like it might fit, so I knelt down and tried it in the lock. To my surprise, it turned with a satisfying click. With a deep breath, I opened the door. Inside was a small room, no bigger than a storage closet. The walls were lined with mirrors, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. But what caught my attention was the small, ornate chest in the center of the room. I approached the chest slowly, my heart racing. It was locked, but there was no keyhole, just a strange, intricate design on the lid. As I ran my fingers over it, the chest suddenly sprang open with a loud creak, startling me. Inside, I found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up and began to read. The diary belonged to a girl named Clara, who lived in the house over 100 years ago. She wrote about her life, her dreams, and something dark lurking in the shadows of the house. As I turned the pages, a sense of unease washed over me. Clara mentioned a presence that watched her, whispering her name when she was alone. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves. I froze, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Clara had called, soft yet insistent. I looked around the room, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and I slammed the diary shut. I backed away from the chest, but as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me. My heart raced as I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, echoing around me. "Let me out," it pleaded. I felt a surge of fear, but I knew I had to escape. I looked around and noticed a window at the far end of the room. It was small, but I was determined. I rushed over and pried it open, squeezing through just as the door finally opened with a loud bang. I fell to the floor in the attic, gasping for breath. I looked back at the door, now closed and seemingly innocent. My heart was still pounding, and I felt a cold draft behind me. Glancing back at the chest, I saw that it had closed itself again, as if nothing had ever happened. I left the attic, shaken, and tried to forget about the room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was still there, watching, waiting for someone to listen to her story. After that day, I avoided the attic. I never spoke of what happened, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear whispers echoing through the house. "Let me out," they would say, and I would pull the covers over my head, hoping the past would stay locked away.